than our local cable subscribers.
So this is the Easthampton Rent Study Committee. This is our listening session for landlords and developers to inform on our local home rule petition for rent stabilization in Easthampton. A little bit of a different structure from our last one, but I am going to start off with doing a really short presentation, just giving an introduction to the committee, rent stabilization policy, and then I will open it up to people who want to give comments, and we will. I don't think we're gonna try not to have it be a back and forth. We're gonna try to just like take the input, and then if there's any feedback that we want to follow up on, we can do that separately. But yeah, does that sound good to everyone?
I think so.
All right. So to start, the Easthampton Rent Study Committee was established by Easthampton City Council in September of 2025. The committee has two main tasks. The first is to explore the creation of a legislative petition requesting that Easthampton be allowed to implement rent stabilization locally. The second is to study, analyze, and review any other acts that the city can take to support Easthampton tenants. The committee has been reviewing rent stabilization policies in cities and states across the country and is now starting the process of drafting that home rule petition proposal for rent stabilization. Currently, there's a statewide ban on rent control. That's MGL Chapter 40P, and state laws usually preempt the local laws. So this home rule petition would allow us to set a local law that would supersede the state. Obviously, they would have to approve it. The state legislature would have to approve it. So the Rent Study Committee is made up of city councilors, tenants, landlords, and also developers. All right, so just a little overall background on rent stabilization. So I want to make clear that rent stabilization is not a total freeze on rent. It's necessarily what we're interested in trying to push for. Usually rent stabilization refers to a cap on the amount that rent can be raised at any one time. And that's usually tied to some sort of index, whether it's inflation or just a set yearly cap. And usually there are reasonable allowances for increases to cover the expense and costs. So when property taxes go up or when major capital repairs need to be done, most policies that we've researched allow a sort of pass through of those costs in some way. Overall, the goal is to protect communities from the displacement caused by the housing crisis, and then to pair these efforts with additional housing construction to address the severe shortage over time. So it's not going to solve the housing crisis on its own, but this will allow us to protect stability for renters while we build more housing that we need. So again, as the main pillars of rent stabilization, like I mentioned, involves setting the rent cap. So how much is the increase going to be every year, or how much can it be every year? What exemptions to those caps could exist? So pass-throughs of expenses, vacancy decontrol, so deciding on when the rent can reset to the market or if it can between tenants. Exemptions to what types of properties will be applicable. So whether we're exempting new construction for the first 10 years or 15 years, exempting owner-occupied properties or small buildings, or specifically carving out subsidized or nonprofit housing as well. And then there's also questions of administration, how the rent increase gets determined every year, if it is changing every year, how appeals and enforcement are dealt with. That's also an important part of the policy design process. Okay, so I think I was on the wrong slide, but the notes were the same, so. All right, so the main rationale for why we need rent stabilization in Easthampton. So we've seen recent sharp increases for a lot of tenants in Easthampton. This has precipitated the formation and the really strong organizing behind the tenants union. Especially, we've seen this happen, especially when the properties change ownership. Specifically, there have been examples of ownership changing to someone out of state and coming in and raising rents significantly. I'll also add, so, and this is while we're in an ongoing housing crisis. So the housing crisis isn't new, but this behavior is just the next most alarming part of it that we've seen. So in Massachusetts, currently over 50% of residents are cost burdened. So that means they're spending 50% or over a third of their income on rent. And in Easthampton, this number is 40% of renter households. So slightly less than the state average, but still above what should be normal. And again, this is driven by overall the lack of building over the past 10 years, or the last 20 years, really. And just overall an aging housing stock, limited inventory is driving prices up and allowing this rent increases to go unchecked. And like I mentioned, rent stabilization would help prevent displacement for middle and low income renter households from those large jumps while still allowing for reasonable annual increases to address real increases in costs or, like I mentioned, renovations or improvements. This is just a data visualization showing the renters and homeowners cost burden. So this is percentage of the population that spends a set portion of their income on housing. So the yellow is households that spend between 30 and 49%, and the red is severely cost burden that are paying over half their income on rent. So for renters, that's 12%. For homeowners with mortgages, that's 14%. And I think that's reflective of a lot of people being in homes that they can't necessarily afford anymore, but don't have anywhere else to go. Again, because of the housing shortage. And then again, rent has increased. This is the median gross rent across all across all unit types. So across all different numbers of bedrooms in 2018 and 2024. And you can see that the increase has been almost 30% over that time. This stuff. Again, like I mentioned, rent stabilization cannot solve the housing crisis on its own. It needs to be paired with it also needs to be paired with tenant protections to prevent the incentives to evict people if there's vacancy decontrol, but it also needs to be paired with a serious investment in new housing construction. The state of Massachusetts needs to build over 220,000 new housing units before 2035. Over 17,000 of those units need to be built in the Pioneer Valley. So again, this is not the fix to the housing crisis, but it will help stop the bleeding in our community. So currently, there are 3 avenues that are being pursued to enact rent stabilization regulation. There's a statewide ballot initiative that a lot of people probably know about. There is the statewide legislation that would lift the preemption and give municipalities the local option. And then there's also this process, the home rule petition, that would allow us as a city to request special permission from the state. So the statewide ballot initiative provisions here, it ties to the rate of inflation with the maximum cap of 5%. It does not allow for vacancy decontrol, so the rent stays controlled across different tenancies. There are exemptions for new construction, for public and subsidized housing, and also elderly housing. And then it's also paired with additional just cause eviction protections. And the enforcement mechanism is the Attorney General. The status of this is that they are currently in their second round of collecting signatures to get that on the ballot. And I believe the deadline for that is July 17th. So we'll know more then. The state legislation, S 1447. Like I mentioned, this would lift the ban on municipalities enacting rent stabilization policies, so allowing cities and towns to create a local option. And this, again, I think that in this legislation, it would require the cities and towns to include exemptions for new construction in small buildings and also include protections for no-fault evictions. And the status of this is that it's been referred to the to committee, and the deadline has been extended to June 30th before we'll get a report out from the committee. And then the home rule petition. So like I mentioned, the possible provisions, we have the cap on rent, what sort of exemptions will allow to both expenses and also different types of buildings, the potential eviction protections, and then there's also the element of if these other avenues are successful or they're not, that will potentially change how we have to strategize around building the local policy in Easthampton. So the process for this to get a home rule petition through is we, as the Rent Study Committee, would be drafting the proposed policy and also the proposed legislation to go before the legislature. It would get reviewed by the city solicitor to make sure that it's legally sound. The mayor would obviously have to sign off on it after the city council approves it. And then the measure gets filed with the legislature. And then from there, it's just like any other bill. There's advocacy that needs to be done at the legislative level. And it would obviously go to a committee potentially. And then finally, if it gets through committee, it would have to be signed by the governor. So the status of where we are in this process is sort of before any of those steps. We're sort of in the information gathering process, collecting public input and participation. And then with your input, we'll be drafting that local policy to present to full council. So we're really looking to hear your thoughts on those provisions that we mentioned. So what do you think is a fair percentage rent increase every year? Do you think that we should exempt small buildings or owner-occupied buildings? What sort of expenses would you want to see be able to pass through some of that to tenants? And additionally, like what sort of enforcement mechanisms would you want to see or would you see fair? So yeah, that's a lot of information. So I don't expect all of that to stick, but I just wanted to give that overall context. But now I would open it up to anyone who's interested in, oh, did you want?
Kind of just one correction. I think you said that the current signature collection is scheduled to end on July 17th, but I think that's actually June 17th.
Oh, okay.
And then it's July 1st is the deadline. And then also something I wasn't included in the slides is there's a possibility that it could be that a home rule petition could become a non-binding referendum in our election should the mayor or city council want that to happen, or the legislature could send it back. So it's a long process that we're looking at, irrespective of whichever process moves forward, if any.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. And also I wanted to say this before I open it up to speak. So I just wanted to set the table for this conversation. I definitely think there's been a lot of conversation about this in the community, and there's been we had our listening session with the tenants. I just want to make it very clear that this isn't meant to be an adversarial conversation. I don't think that anyone on the committee sees this as a tenants versus landlords issue. I think that we all have sort of come to the table to try to figure out what are some common sense, what are some reasonable guidelines that we can set for our housing market so it's healthy for everyone. We don't want to make it untenable for small landlords to be able to operate in the city. We know that people own small buildings, live in half of the building, or are responsible landlords that raise their rent reasonably and are transparent. And we know that there are good practices happening in Easthampton. So it's not trying to be a punishment for that. It's trying to set a protection for the real impacts that we know are happening to tenants. So I don't, this isn't meant to be like a scary thing for landlords that we're coming for you. It's we want to hear what sounds reasonable to you and really meet in the middle. All right. So with that, I would open it up to anyone in the room who's interested in giving a public comment. I'll say we'll try to limit it to 5 minutes each. Coming. Anyone in the room?
Yeah, I can say a couple things.
If you just want to give your name and your address or your precinct.
I'm Jay. I'm local, and I'm a landlord. So I don't think it's a mystery or a question of rising costs are here, and it's hurting everybody. And on the landlord side, there's some uncontrollables that we do have to consider, and it's completely out of our control. Easthampton specific, but many Massachusetts have extremely high tax growth rates, insurance growth rates, water and sewer. There's something coming up on the ballot soon in Easthampton where they're going to potentially look to increase taxes again on property owners. And that's something that we control as much as we possibly can. Cost to renovate, to maintain, pay, our common electric, our common gas, etc. So it's just something that I think that should be a part of it. CPI is quite constraining. It doesn't really reflect the actual cost that hits the bottom line. I want to protect not only affordable housing stock, but good quality housing stock. I want to make sure it's maintained to a level where people want to be able to live in those units, not just afford it. And enjoyment of habitability. So that's just one comment. And then two, I think we all heard and know about a landlord from out of state, institutional, coming in, buying something, seeing value from lower rents and spiking it $300-$400 per tenant. That's not what we want, but I think we want to incentivize local landlord ownership, people in the community that understand the people that can show up to a meeting here. The person I think that we're talking about, the person, the company based out of New York City. And we want to make sure that landlords that are tied to the community also want to, feel comfortable that their livelihood and their business is intact as well, and they can manage it accordingly.
Anyone else in the room?
Can I ask a question though?
Sure. I mean, the goal was to try to not have it be a back and forth. But maybe at the end, if you wanted to ask specific questions, if we have time, I just want to get through everyone and make sure that everyone has their question. Right. Anyone online? Anyone online that would like to add some comment? If you want to just raise your hand. Or just unmute yourself because there's not that many of you. All right. I would say ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Donna Chappello, and I'm the vice chairman of the committee. And I also sit on the Fair and Affordable Housing Partnership, and I live here in Easthampton and Eastwick. But you were talking about how the CPI does not necessarily cover the cost of inflation. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts as to, one thing we heard from the tenants was you could have a standardized, like a $50 or a $100 a month cap, like a dollar amount cap, as opposed to having a CPI. But do you have any thoughts specifically about what would be an appropriate way to determine what rental increase annually might be that would be fair both to you as a landlord to be able to manage your properties, as well as allow tenants to have some assurances and ability to plan financially with your.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think, and these are general, thoughts. It's not like a concrete number
Yeah.
that, I don't have my
We
computer
don't.
open and all that, could run numbers, but I think the goal, and you said something about vacancy decontrol and stuff like that. I think the goal, as a local landlord, is anyone that's living in a unit, we don't want to increase rates that are unsustainable, but we want to be able to escrow for a $50,000-$100,000 new roof that needs to be replaced that doesn't get covered. It's not just about, I guess, the cost of yearly increases in expenses. It's also, being able to cover we had a sewer tank that went out, and it cost multiple hundred of thousands of dollars to replace so people can use the toilet in their apartment. So I think a percentage that also allocates for uncontrollables like taxes, insurance, water, and sewer that's dictated by the city is a fair place to start, but I can't kind of equate into it how those big expenses are taken into account that happen might not be every year, but every 3 to 5 years that we need to escrow and keep cash on the side for it to make sure that the quality and the habitability of those units are maintained. So that's one thing. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think a point that I made before as well is something like vacancy decontrol. It to a degree makes sense because we want to be able to upgrade and bring units that are a lot of properties in Easthampton were built in the 60s and 70s. If you don't have something like vacancy decontrol, then a $15,000-$20,000 renovation for one unit that you're probably going to need every 10 years. Financially, it doesn't really, the math doesn't make sense when you have like a $50 or $70 increase. I think the break even would be about like 20 plus years on like a $15,000 to $20,000 renovation. So just scenarios.
Is there anyone in the committee that wants to ask any questions or?
I would love to hear from other landlords if you have any thoughts on, sort of what it might be an appropriate exemption. How could the city assist landlords? For example, if there was some kind of like a sewer breakage, that's something that's a public health issue for your tenants. Could the city do something about that? I mean, we're kind of thinking about how we could help the tenants in this process. Help the landlords in this process as well.
If not, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I would have a follow-up. Just because I think I definitely hear you, and I agree that like we want to make sure that the policies that we're putting in place aren't going to disincentivize repairs and maintenance and like keeping our housing stock from deteriorating and losing that. I think part of the housing crisis is we're losing housing stock as well as not building enough. So I definitely agree with that. I guess my question is more sort of in relation to some of the other policies that we've researched before that do allow for exemptions for specific repairs or maintenance or renovations. I know that there was an example I think we heard of where the decontrol between vacancies was tied to real improvements to the property. So I guess I would be curious to know, like, is there a reasonable sort of ratio that you would expect, or that you would be okay with in terms of paying yourself versus passing on to tenants? Like, a lot of these programs look like you can raise rent more than the limit to essentially like amortize a cost over a certain amount of time. And like, if you're putting in a new roof, you could, let's say, pass 25% on to the tenants, and that means that you're raising their rent an extra, $100 a month over 2 years or whatever that looks like. Does that sound like a reasonable structure to you? Like, is there a reasonable sort of ratio for those types of repairs or increases that you would see fair to take on yourself versus the tenant?
I think to a degree what you're saying is something that is sort of already done, where you put the investment in and it gets amortized by the rates that you increase it. I wish that there was like a easy calculus to do it, like right off the bat. It's not like I've run those numbers. I think that sort of exemption makes more sense than just saying like the statewide ballot that's just CPI or 5%, whatever's lower. Like it seems more reasonable. And I think at the end of the day, like, the goal is not to do $300, $400 increases even on renovated units, which was kind of like the problem that happened at out-of-state investor. They didn't even update those units. They just increased the rents crazy, just because they could. Is there a certain ratio? Yeah, probably. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but yeah.
I appreciate the response, and I know that it's a lot of information and numbers yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the statewide initiative too, because I think that part of what our mandate is to look at what would be appropriate for us here in Easthampton, and that's why we're discussing whether a home rule petition would be appropriate. Because if we're looking at the state mandate passes, that might not be right for us. That might be, the percentage might be wrong. Maybe we don't think the exemptions fit our community. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And I think I also want to say that we would love to have any written comments that folks want to give if you don't feel comfortable speaking up in this meeting, that you did. We'd love to get written comments from folks about, like, if it's not a CPI, what should it be? What exemptions would be appropriate? What would be the pass-throughs for tenants? Should there be vacancy decontrol, and what does that look like? Is there a limit on how much rent can be increased after the tenant leaves, even if there is decontrol? Does it still have to be a percentage or not? And is that going to be reflective of what work has been done on the building, for example? How should we look at those? How should we look at those issues? And then the administration piece, we haven't heard anything from anyone yet on the landlord side about, how should this be administered? Who should be responsible for, if there is a violation? If, for example, someone buys a building from, lives in Florida and says, I'm going to raise the rent. How do we manage that? Who's going to be responsible for that? And how is that going to be even known or reported? So, so I'd really love to hear more from them. We've heard a lot from tenants, and we'd really love to hear more from them.
Maybe we could just we have a few folks in the room, and I know we have, I think, more online. Even if we could just do a go round, and if you could just maybe share Are you an owner operator? Do you have X number of units? We just want to make sure we can get a sense of what the landscape is here locally as well, because we've done a lot of research, but we can only take it so far because we need to hear from the community of landlords as well. So if we know who's interested and who's here tonight, that might also be helpful for us going forward to get a sense of, you obviously joined for a reason. So what is your perspective? And we would like to hear from more people than just Jay, who's been holding down for everyone so far. Does that feel
I like to be speak. I'm Naresh Patel.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Yes. So I'm in a business, in a real estate business for last 15 year or so, and 99% all my tenant are happy. All those year, we raise the rent really reasonable, like 30, 40, $50 every year goes up. Right now we are is $120, but we able to be barely minimum cover the all expense in $120 for 2 bedroom apartment and 70 or $80 for 1 bedroom apartment. So the rent control, I understand why you start everything. Some out of the state people who invest in Easthampton and they raise the rent like 300, 400 and up to $500 per the tenant. And this is how I think it started, like last year. The normally all the landlord in Easthampton, they never raise the rent like this. So it shouldn't be any issue. All those year, like I don't think so. I'm living in Easthampton for last 30 year, and I never heard any issue like this. So when the investor comes from the out of the state, this is will gonna be happen. So yes, I understand shouldn't be go 300 or $400 up, but shouldn't be control. Or there shouldn't be have a like minimum some number you are asking, like what is the minimum number or what is the minimum percentage we are the landlord looking. But that's not easy answer to, like the Jay explained, there is a sometime big expense comes. It's not easy for the like so maybe out of 100 tenant, maybe like if you put the serious money in a couple unit, so those unit have to be go up like 100 or $150 or maybe up to $200 up, because once you put like 15 to $20,000 in that unit, you cannot just survive with the like $60 or $70 or 5%. And if the town is going to be really push to the landlord this kind of the control, I feel like I think we are going to be start selling the property out of the state people, and then the we are the small people who runs the business work hard. If the out of the state people who's like millionaire or billionaire start dumping the money, I don't think so then town have much control, because those are coming with the like with the from New York or California, and they have a like crazy amount of the money, and they have a crazy amount of the backup of the attorney and all those. I don't think so town want to be fight that anything like that. So yes, I understand we don't want to be raised like 300 $400. There is a no set number if you asking me right now, but we are reasonably living, giving everybody a chance between 70 to $100 for many years, and everybody's happy. There is a never questions. This is just suddenly happened because the one investor came out of the straight and he started the main thing. So I don't know. There is not a set number, but we should be more discuss and talk to the more landlord. There is a many small landlord in a town. They have a 10 unit, 15 unit, 20 unit, 30 unit, 50 unit. So those all people need to be, because everybody is not happy. Like the tenant is not happy. Same time the landlord is not happy either now. Since the like the town is start thinking about the controlling everything. So like I give you one example. One of my property have when I bought it, I think the property tax 10 year ago is around $55,000. Right now, the property tax for same property is $120,000. So my property tax in a 10 year went double. So what are you thinking? Like we shouldn't be increase anything? My water sewer bill is going up, insurance is going crazy up. So I don't know. I'm not arguing, but we need to be sit down more often and discuss more point rather than just giving a one-time landlord a chance, one meeting and say like, hey, let's come up with the idea. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Mike, just to respond to some of that, I hear the concern about small landlords, and I definitely I agree that we don't want to make it so all the small landlords in town need to sell, or we don't want to increase the problem of outside investment. And I do think that you mentioned some costs that, like we mentioned, could be built in to a policy like this that allows for fair increases. And I also just want to echo what Donna said earlier, that we are going to continue to collect input throughout the process. We're going to set up a form that allows people to submit specific feedback. So this isn't your only chance.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have a way that folks can contact us individually or as a group? Because I think what Naresh was saying was that there should be an ongoing conversation, and if a landlord wants to speak directly with one of us or a group of us, how would they go about doing that?
So right now we don't have a directory of the members of this committee online. I think it lists the names, but not emails.
Yeah.
If we wanted to, we could post our emails in like the shared folder potentially, like on a document. Whoever feels comfortable doing that, fielding input, I think that would be appropriate.
There's also 3 city councilors on this, right? So if people wanted to share with one of the city councilors, then that can be shared outwards to the rest of the committee.
Yeah. And also, just to note, we have, I think, 4 landlords on the committee, 2 tenants, and a couple of homeowners. So, if you feel more comfortable in speaking with one of the landlords, then certainly city councilors can help with that.
Yeah,
Make
can
that
facilitate that. Absolutely.
And Felicia is a landlord.
Yes, I'm one of the.
one of the 4.
I think you were going to say something, David.
Well, I was gonna ask Chaim if I could step down and speak as a landlord developer, to make a few points.
Please do.
Just, so what I'm observing in the general public is, as a landlord, in general, the business community will have a, knee-jerk reaction to any of this stuff and to, be opposed. People like Jay and Naresh are more than willing to come to a meeting and find out information. Not all business people are so open-minded to that, and some are relying on maybe the landlord association or the realtor association to bail them out of the situation. So one of the things I want to stress, because this is recorded and people can find it, is that I don't know what's going to happen, but this is your chance to be part of the process to the landlords, and to think about specific proposals. I'll just throw out a couple. So when Naresh mentioned $70 to $100, we can extrapolate a little bit and say 7 to 10%. If a rent's $1,000 a month, $100, and obviously that's a starting point. I think Jay's point of the CPI is well taken. The CPI is a weak benchmark. And bankers always love to use it. Big commercial landlords try to use it. But it doesn't reflect true costs. It doesn't reflect true inflation. So if there's going to be I would suggest landlords think about CPI plus a percentage of 3 to 5%. I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to encourage some input, some, harder numbers so that we can we can make a recommendation to city council. As far as exceptions, I really think the landlord should think about, real estate taxes during years of revow, real estate taxes during years of overrides. I don't know how to really do it as far as insurance. Insurance this year for me will be double what it was 10 years ago. I don't know how to really, but it's a cost. Water sewer rates are not, water sewer rates I think should be an exception. Like in the city side, I know why, but water and sewer is supposed to be an enterprise fund. And in theory, the money raised by the water sewer fees are supposed to pay for the water and sewer department. However, the city side charges a 40% management fee to handle other things. But enterprise fund can be raised by the Board of Public Works. So a lot of fees have come up in the past few years for inspections, for certain size meters, for sprinkler inspections. It used to be $25, now they're $150 per biannual. When they read a meter now to sell a house, it used to be $20, now it's $150. So there's other little fees, maybe we have to absorb some of those. But I'm just trying to say, landlords, this is your chance to think about some of those things that you think might be legitimately accepted. So if you make a list of 10 exceptions, it doesn't mean they have to all be accepted, but it's something for us to work on. Utility, I don't know if it's like insurance, but utility rates, I have solar, and the reason why I have solar is in 2014, I saw what was happening. Kilowatt rates at that time were around 22 cents a kilowatt. Now they're 32 cents. So a lot of apartments a lot of our apartments are separately metered, but a lot of apartments are not separately metered. And and so when a utility company comes out and they need a new yacht in January, they hit you. And in July, when the yacht needs fuel, they hit you again. And that's just the way it is. And there's public utility hearings, but there's no recourse. So I'm just talking to the committee a little bit, but to the landlords out there, if they see this meeting, think about some of the math that you're worried about and put it on paper. And I really like at the last meeting, the last listening session, one person talked about decontrol. And I think that's one thing you really need to think about. You can go back to the horror stories in New York City with decontrol, but if you're opposed to, or if you're in favor of unit decontrol when a tenant leaves, write that down. Let us know, because I think it's crucial. But nothing can be assumed. And I think the landlords have to understand too. All the landlords say, "Well, I'm a nice guy. I don't raise my rents." So what? We're in this process now. We're in a process of we're in a situation right now. So speak now, forever hold your peace, but with concrete examples so that we can work with something. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, so at the tenants listening session, I got a kick out of this. I'm a tenant. I've had good landlords. I've had bad landlords. I'm a landlord. I've had good tenants and I've had bad tenants. But the thing about bad tenants is it's like everything else in life. You can have 100 tenants and 99 are awesome, but that one tenant would drive you nuts. And that's the one that makes landlords hard. That's the one that makes landlords resistant to talking. That's the one that says, no, this is the way it is. So I'm just reaching out to the landlords to help the committee come back with some concrete proposals. And the last thing I think that might be an idea is, so we've heard talk about the out-of-state investors. One of the things that really bothered me last year when that happened, the specific example on National Line Street was, notices being taped to the door. And then, I know a tenant there, and she's a woman with a good job, not a crazy Google job, but a good job. And, but she's a single mom with 2 children. She wasn't worried about the rent increase. She was like, what am I going to do? I have daycare, I have schooling, her work, she almost flipped out. It's like, so maybe in those situations, maybe instead of 30 days notice, there should be, if an out-of-state investor buys a unit, there's a 6-month rent freeze, or something, or a 6-month notice. People have lives. That's all.
I think one thing that came up, and I hadn't even thought about it until
Yeah.
you mentioned, the administration portion of it. It's just another cost that comes to mind, unfortunately, which is I would need to hire someone to manage all the administration, keeping track of all the paperwork between all of the units, or at least increase hours to my employees that if they want to take the extra hours, if not, then I have to figure that piece out. And that's another cost that the landlord would have to absorb.
Mhm. Thank you.
So it just comes down to also the thought of what is the level of administration that is required, that specifically to bigger landlords that would need to hire 1 or 2 people.
Naresh, are you trying to say something or?
No, I think I'm going to be talk to the Dave suggested. I will talk to some small landlord in a town, and we'll figure out something. And going to be contact you, Dave or Kevin or someone soon, and figuring out what to do. I understand everybody's remark and everything, and I understand like what's the sentiment in a town right now, but this is what I know. And I think they mentioned that kind of like that the people who purchased that property in Neswanak Street and make this bubbling water in town, I just to make it little calm down, I bought that property. I paid that guy, I think I'm not wrong, I paid more than $1 million extra to that people to kick out from the town. And I didn't raise my rent. So I think we will discuss with some other landlords, and we'll figure out and come back to you. But one thing I know that it's not fair. If the town is not gonna be fair with the landlord, then definitely landlord thinking different way to be get out from the business and bring the out of state the people. I don't want to do that, but I just bought that property, Neswanak Street, paid extra $1 million and not raise the rent to the tenant for another extra 1 more year. So we'll see you guys soon.
Yeah. Well, that's remarkable, and thank you for doing that.
To mention it as well, and just speaking as a landlord, I think I would like to open up our books at least. I don't have an issue on a couple of the properties because I think some of the stories last week are certainly concerning, and if in fact this is completely accurate on face value, I find it problematic. But I was also kind of taken aback by the overall sentiment that somehow you own a property and you're uber wealthy and a rent increase is just lining your pocket. So I've property some of which I've had for 15 years, and I'm happy to share with the committee and even post online all over the books. And I think you'll see a different picture. I mean, I've been in properties for over 25 years in just Easthampton, and I can tell you it's not a profitable venture short term. Is it bring long-term wealth? Absolutely. But they are designed by nature, especially in the last decade, to sell at essentially a break even. As was mentioned, I mean, you're lucky to be able to build some sort of a net at the end of the year to build up a nest egg to cover long-term investment or, long-term repairs and things and the roof on the property. It's not quite what folks think. And that doesn't really scale either. I mean, Reese's a local investor, certainly has quite a bit around here. I think he'll tell you firsthand, and maybe he'll open some books or maybe not, but tell you that even if you have 200 units, you probably are oddly going to have a hard time making an actual living off of that if you've purchased them in the last decade. And in some respect, even worse, because I can tell you firsthand, the bulk of my investments came in '08 to, the last 5 years when I was getting them at interest rates of 3 to 4.5%. And with a 5 to 7 year arm on that, almost all of them are up now, and you're paying now 6.5, 6.75%. That in no way equates to the 3% annual rent increases we've been putting on tenants over the last decade. The math does not work. Never mind, as everybody's mentioned, the insurance, the water and sewer, and then you get a couple tenants who know, quite frankly, know what they can do in Mass, and then you can get a tenant that'll stay there 6 months without ever paying the rent. And now you're not collecting. It could cost you $10,000-15,000 to get them out. They destroy the unit when you leave, and it costs you $20,000 to repair that, and you'll never see that again. They don't give you a forwarding address, and they're gone. You have no idea, no recourse. And even if you have the forwarding address, you get a small claims judgment. I think anybody who's had a tenant will tell you, good luck. Good luck collecting that. I bet you I've seen, I don't know, $5,000 out of $100,000 in judgments. It's just, you never see it.
And what's tough about that, I was being a little snarky about the one bad tenant, but as a landlord, you're going to have situations that Kevin just described. So like any business though, the good tenants subsidize the bad tenant. So, it's, we don't want to get into landlord, tenant examples and law, but it is hard to make, a living strictly from rents. There used to be rules of thumb that if you had 100 units, you could draw a healthy income. But one of the problems with real estate is a lot of people have different motivations for real estate. Unlike local smaller landlords, it could be a tax shelter. It could be an institutional corporation just looking for another part of their portfolio, but it's all part of the big market. And but on a local level, all these things do add up. So I think Kevin offered to show the expenses would be very helpful. And but not only that, it's good faith.
Yeah. And before I pass it over to Donna, because I see her hands up, I wanted to just to clarify what you meant. When you say ARM, you're talking about an adjustable rate mortgage, right?
Yeah, you're on the fixed period of it. So typically when you get a commercial mortgage, there'll be an ARM, which is a fixed period of that. So it's usually 5 years, 7 years. The problem is you're buying a property, you're kind of hoping that, they don't change drastically. When you're buying something at 3% and now it's 6.75, literally, the day that ARM is up and it changes drastically. So those are real problems that I think, and that's why I think looking at the books, you'll see that it's very difficult to predict that far out. And what will happen with any type of overly restrictive rent control is you're going to get nearly every landlord is going to take a very, mathematical approach to this to make sure they're covered. And you're going to end up seeing, I think, those rents being increased by pretty much the maximum every year by almost every landlord, because you're going to have to plan for the worst. Whereas I know a lot of like Maurice, I have chatted. I think Dave's is in the same boat. We have very, very minimal. Like I said, I was straight up. You can ask any of our tenants, 3% every single year. That's what every tenant gets. Mm-hmm. We win some, we lose some, but that's worked. But by opening the books, I think you'll see properties that we've had for 10 years. The net has actually decreased over 10 years due to the most recent increases in interest rates, expenses. Some of the units we pay heating on. I have 99 Cottage Street. I pay the heating oil. We get killed on that. It's only 4 units. I can't pass that on that quickly to the tenants. So it's just not quite the because you have 100 units or 50 or 20 or 10 or 300, I think that it's, you actually see the financing behind it. I think folks would be surprised. And that's why I have no issue. There's nothing right there. And I think actually it would be very beneficial to say, here's 3 properties. Here's even then, here's a brand new one. Because, it's a whole nother story, but we want to add rental units, but the cost of construction now, if it is not affordable housing, which most of the folks I feel that are coming to the meetings actually probably would not qualify for that. I mean, at least some of the folks I spoke to, when they understand the income requirements, they said, oh, actually that doesn't work. I need to be more in a market rate. The cost of those units now, we're not going to get $2,700 a month for a 3-bedroom because we're going to make $2,000. It's because that's the cost to break even, and it's a long-term investment, and that's the reality. And like I said, I'm happy to show those numbers as well, because I just think it's like Dave said, it's just a good faith, and let's pull back the curtain and then let's really see what that looks like.
Yeah, and for reference, I mean, even affordable units now are like $600,000 sometimes a piece to build.
To build, right?
So,
The affordable units, because of the codes and things, are almost twice as much as market rate. It's just,
Thomas, the last thing, we have a housing situation that's not of our control. Though Easthampton isn't totally off the hook, because in 1988 we had a moratorium. We've had many anti-development sentiment and proposals, and so now here we are. But one thing in terms of math, if the rent control, I don't see this, was onerous with the current situation, you could see a lot of condo conversions. I mean, rental units are values as to be sold are around 150,000 a unit, possibly. Well, if I was an investor, or if I was still more actively, I would love to buy a unit for 150. I could flip them at 300, 350 very easily. And now, does that help the situation in Easthampton? No, but it's very likely if it's too onerous.
so I'm gonna pass to Donna Gall online. Donna, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi. I just also I know I mentioned Northampton Housing Authority budget last week, and it sounds great that some landlords are going to open up their books. I also wanted to mention, I don't know if other landlords have been a part of this as well, but the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics does call me every year to intake some information. And I know that they do, besides CPI, they do have more targeted inflations towards housing. So I didn't know if that's also a resource that would be valuable.
Yeah, I think there are other inflation measures that are like exclude housing or are specifically just focused on housing.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that. That's it for now. Sorry, I'm kind of multitasking here, but I'm listening. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay, Donna, the other Donna, you had a question?
Kevin, you were talking about the ARM and the increases. And I think one of the things that we have seen in other municipalities are with respect to the exemptions. And so certain buildings that are still in that, they've been built within a certain time period, that they're exempt from the stabilization caps, whatever those are. And I think that that's to accommodate the ARM. Am I
well, it's
seeing
going to
that
probably
correctly?
change every time it changes hands. It's
Yeah.
one thing if it's paid off, but the building could be 50 years old and you could be in the same boat as if it's 3 years old.
Because you would still be,
You
if
get a
you're
mortgage.
renovating a building, you're still obtaining some sort of mortgage to reconstruct or.
more with the sale. You know, so if you owned it for 20 years or 30
Yeah.
years or, it's been your family and then I
Yeah.
buy it, I'm going to have a new note. I'm basing that on today's interest, which, obviously
Yeah.
today's a little high, but if that was 7 years ago
Yeah,
and you were getting a commercial mortgage at, 3.5%.
Yeah.
And here we are, your arm is up and all of a sudden your interest rate nearly doubled.
yeah,
That's a massive increase on, a note that's 600, 800 $1 million. I mean, that's
Right.
thousands of dollars every month in interest.
so the exemption, if there were an exemption, that exemption would be not just for new buildings, but when a building itself turned over.
I mean,
If
that would
there
be
were-
tricky. I think it would be more be a documented expense
Yeah.
of a substantial or change in your interest rate.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to process how that might work in terms of if you bought a building that was already being rented and you're going to do the renovations. It's an older building. You want to update the kitchen, the bathroom, whatever, put a new roof on. So you get the commercial mortgage to do that. Then you're in the same position as someone who has just newly built a building. So I'm thinking about how could we structure some sort of exemption that would allow for that update?
Yeah.
Well, I think it might have to be like an agreement. So say a landlord comes to the administrating entity and says, I want to put new roof on my 3 buildings. The cost is
Yeah.
$150,000.
Yeah,
And then from there's discussions and then maybe there could be, you could work with something,
mhm,
but, maybe it's just some kind of a policy that, okay, if you're going to put a certain percentage back into your building within a year,
mhm.
so if it's assessed at $1 million and you're putting that 10%, part of that 10%, I guess, could have a little relief. That it's something, that could be worked upon. That's out in the open.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just have one question related to, I think you raised the concern or the potential reality of if there's a restrictive rent or I think just rent stabilization in general that you predict all the landlords to raise it as much as they could. But I guess in some of the examples we've seen, there's this idea of of an increased bank or allowing landlords to sort of bank an increase. So if they don't, the cap is 5% and they only raise 2.5% next year, it's 7%. Is that something that you think would address that concern?
It's possible, but everything with this is just so many different, variables. I mean, at that point, then you're going to end up having to tell somebody that they can't take the 20% they banked and hit it all at once because we're right back in this same boat. Whoever that poor tenant is, that was there, and you say, well, hey, I got this 25%. I haven't raised rents in forever, and they're thinking that they're free and clear, and then all of a sudden, their rent goes up $300 a month because they banked it. So I mean, selfishly, sure, that could help, but that's not going to, I think that creates more problems for the tenant. I mean, to Risha's point, I feel like was a couple players that came in and did some pretty, poor business practices. And I think by and large, Easthampton had a pretty good tenant landlord relationship for many, many years. I think they had some really good people operating around here and things. And some people came in and did some pretty terrible things. I just hope that the knee-jerk reaction isn't, upsetting the apple cart beyond what those folks did. But hopefully we can come to something that's palatable for everybody.
Right, and I think part of what the stabilization would maybe prevent that from happening, prevent investors from out of state coming in and saying, oh, here's a property I've got the cash, I can buy it and I can raise the rents because these people aren't paying very much money. They've never paid very much money, and and that's the I don't know if you want to call it the good graces or the care that people have for other people in their community.
Well, also it's supposed to, in general, it's supposed to reflect our community. So
Right,
if
exactly.
rents are less than Boston, it's because that's the cost of living is less than Boston. And, you know, I applaud any effort to protect that. But when outside investors say, oh, you know, Western Mass is, you know, 30% less than Boston, but we're not Boston. You know, and they think they can, you know, but they think they can, well, they try it, and it is what it is.
Well, I saw you walked in late. Did you want to give a public comment or?
I think I'm still getting caught up to speed. I think hi, my name is Romy. I'm a first-time homeowner with my partner this year, or this decade, I should say. We bought our house in 2023. We have never raised the rent. We use our home as a sort of way to get trans people from the South up to New England. And it's very hard, I think, to sit and listen to sort of more professional landlords talk about the game of extraction, like profit margins are something that needs protecting. It's very difficult to hear that perspective when the people that we're talking about taking money from are my friends and my neighbors and the people who live here on the ground. I don't think that is something that I think that if we are viewing renting as an investment, right, and you cannot afford to keep your investment without raising rents of working people in this town, then I think you made a bad investment and you should consider not keeping it, that your profit margins should be cut. If this sort of tax every year is going to make it impossible for you to keep your properties, then you don't have enough wiggle room to fix your properties and upkeep your properties. Right. And I think that what we've heard from the tenants is also that they are willing to stand together against, you know, the issues that will come through here. So that's a very different perspective, I think, than what I've heard since I walked in. I think that this is what our taxes are for. I'm late because I went to the music event this evening. I saw my kid in 5th grade. At the chorus, which will disappear, right? These are one of the things we're talking about cutting. And I understand that's not anybody's fault, but it is definitely our responsibility. And I feel like a grown-up who's willing to take on responsibility.
Romy, thank you for coming in and for your perspective. We had a tenants meeting last week and we heard from tenants and some similar concerns that you're raising. This particular meeting, we're really interested in learning from.
Thank goodness I'm a homeowner, yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel that way. I just have that sort of moral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to just thank you for sharing. I just want to do another round of people in the room just so we are thorough. Anyone else online wanted to give a comment? All right. So we have a lot to digest, and I'm sure I'll work with you, Donna, to get sort of a form together so we can collect some additional.
Maybe there's a way, city councilors would know this, I think, but maybe there's a way to set up as an email, a city-wide email. I don't want to be using my private server.
Yeah, I think probably the best way to do it is to have the 3 city councilors. This is a short-term committee, so I think to create a citywide email, I think they've had some challenges with that in the past. So I think we'll probably the most
we can create
getting it done quickly, right? And
so we could do some kind of like the Google Forms, or you know, give us your first name, or you can do it anonymously. And are you a landlord? Are you a tenant? What is the, you know, these are the things that we are looking at, and we'll love your suggestions on those. You know?
Yeah. And I definitely want to make clear, like, I'm happy to make connections. Anyone who reaches out to me or any of the counselors, I'm sure they'll be happy to make the connection if someone's looking for a more back and forth one-on-one conversation. I want to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity, like, in a structured way that provides all the information up front and then says, what are your thoughts? And then all the information, what are your thoughts? Like, that sort of connection would be helpful.
And I'm open to that too, but I'm also aware of public meeting laws. So I'm not sure how that how that would work with a private email. I wouldn't want to be using a private email. Do that, but we can talk about that.
Do you want to do a go around like we did with the tenants so people know who we all are?
Sure. Yeah, good idea. Do you want to start?
I'm sure.
Asking you, shall we see?
Yeah, exactly. Felicia, I am on the rent study committee. I'm a city councilor. I'm the precinct 2 city councilor and city council vice president. And I am also a landlord. I am a owner operator. I own a duplex over in New City and I have one tenant who is my next door neighbor.
Connie Denham, I also sit on the committee. I'm the city councilor. Since you mentioned vice president, so I'm a president of the city council, homeowner, and yeah, just really committed to trying to support residents, homeowners to kind of figure out the dilemma that we find ourselves in.
Great energy.
I am Carolyn Cushing and I am a landlord. I have a tenant in the duplex, an in-law apartment. And yes, appreciate people being here and all the dialogue so we can come up with a policy, a proposal that, maintains Easthampton's special quality while not, it has to change to be dynamic, but to maintain the people who are living here now, who are making it special, not to drive them out.
Donna Shaffello, vice chair, like I am, was the chair. I sit on the Fair and Affordable Housing Partnership as well, and I'm a tenant here in Easthampton, and it was about 2019, 2020.
Carl Saylor. I am a tenant in Easthampton in Precinct 4. I am also a regular participant with the Easthampton Tenants Union, in which capacity I believe I've been unofficially designated the contact.
That's good, Carl. Thank you.
Hi, David Boyle, landlord developer from Autumn Properties, A to Z Storage. I said enough.
That is all.
Kevin Perrier, Norwich Properties, or local landlord and developer, obviously a member of the rent committee.
I am Dermot Wade. I'm also a city councilor. I'm chair of the rent study committee, and I'm a homeowner in town.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for. All right. Do we want to take a motion to adjourn, or?
You bet.
Did we call this to order?
I did. Yeah, I didn't call the last one to order, but.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion in a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Than our local cable subscribers.